What's good, people? Welcome to Pros Only Sports and welcome back to another episode of United State of Mind. You're here with myself, Roland. Today's video, I've been wanting to do this video for a little bit of time. You know, man like Marcus Rashford is in the form of his life right now. And to be honest with you, it's such a great story that, in terms of overcoming adversity and getting back to like his best and probably even going up another level than a lot of us would have expected this season. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot that I'm going to be talking about in this video. I'm going to break it down very, 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 very soon. But make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you're new. Hit that notification bell, follow the socials down below there on your screen, and let's get into this video. I mean, look, Marcus Rashford, man, it's been quite a remarkable turnaround. When you look at last season and the way it ended, and this season, of course, last season, the it's not just Marcus Rashford, the whole team, ending in its worst position in terms of the Premier League, in terms of the club's history, and a lot of players would have come out of the back of that season and they would have been, to be honest with you, ashamed of themselves in terms of the way they performed, because I think us as fans expected more from them, because we know that the team has a lot of ability within it. But just for whatever reason, there was a number of different reasons. Of course, the players weren't performing at their best, and to be honest with you, a lot of us would have come into the season with a bit of apprehension in terms of whether these players were actually good enough to perform. But we put that to the side. I mean, let's talk specifically about Marcus Rashford. Now, the last 18 months of his career, we can say there's been a huge dip when we were considering him as a player in terms of what he was doing prior to those last 18 months, last 2 years, let's say, a young player who was constantly performing at a very high level and was doing the things that we were expecting him to do and we're hoping for him to kick on. The last 18 months, we've seen a dip. Now, you know, it's kind of, even me saying this is kind of like, it's harsh, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like, whilst we were expecting him to make further leaps, as a young player, we all know that that's not necessarily possible, because if he hasn't got the right environment around him, he may struggle to hit those kind of peaks that we were expecting for him to do, especially after such a great start to his career. So, one key thing that would have happened was, obviously we saw over the last 18 months was like a loss of confidence. So, this kind of links to the mental side of the game. I mean, imagine, you know, going to the Euros, for example, and him missing that penalty. The backlash that came from that, from the media, and then obviously the racial abuse that was happening as well. Like when those guys missed those penalties, the kind of flooding of messages through their social media, the abuse that Marcus Rashford was getting off of the back of that, obviously would have definitely, dented his confidence a lot. And from that perspective as well, like, that's not on you. Just because I missed a penalty doesn't mean you get a chance to racially abuse me. So obviously that would have happened. That would have impacted on him. I mean, the general abuse on social media happens every day. It's a daily thing. Like, it's been happening for a very long time for Marcus Rashford. He's one of the most abused athletes in the world. There's a table that shows this, with LeBron James being at the top of there, and the Marcus Rashford is in there in second, or I believe second or third. You know, and that obviously would have an impact. These young players, they are very active on social media. They watch everything that we say, and it's so easy now. We're so interconnected with social media in the world that you can jump on your phone right now, you could tweet something and it could be blasted out to millions of people across the world. And so imagine you being, a person of stature within society. You're a high profile sportsman, and you control part of your social media. For example, you have access to it on your phone, and you're getting constant abuses, constant messages of abuse through your DMs, through mentions, all of this type of stuff from just random people that you will never be able to see in your life. So that obviously would have, contributed to a loss of confidence, for example, because he's expecting, a lot, especially a lot of these people are even fans of the club, fans of the team. So imagine that as a bit of a concept where you're expecting these people to, back you no matter what. Of course, you can be frustrated, you can criticize, but no matter what, you still back the player, right? Um, and his own fans be turning on him, and so that's what I'm saying. It leads into that, right? Where we our fan base is very strange, where you know we are pitting players against each other. So at a certain point in time, it's Martial FC, Rashford FC. Me, I'm not part of any of that. Like at the end of the day, the players have to just be good enough to play for the club, and that's it. And people were doing that kind of weird thing, and what that was doing was creating such a negative environment as well, and obviously another element of loss of confidence for Marcus Rashford, because like I feel like for him and for a lot of these players, where us as fans are pitting them against each other, not me, but people out there were pitting players against each other. More time, these guys just want to play football with each other because they believe in each other. They believe that they all have the correct ability to play for this team, and they want to be able to showcase that on the pitch and be successful with each other on the pitch. So when people are saying Martial is better than Rashford and Rashford is better than Martial, more time they just want to play with each other they just want to play on the pitch together, and they want to do their thing. And like, look, I gotta say this, right? Because like this kind of leads into this, right? Where I'm gonna say this. People who are praising Marcus Rashford right now after trashing him and slandering him through the last 18 months, they should be ashamed of themselves. Because the reason why I say this is like, you can't change your mind. This is different from like, having an opinion on something, being presented with more information, and then making a better informed decision. This is different because Marcus Rashford burst onto the scene doing what he was doing. And I'll explain more as we move on to in the video. He's had a dip, and that dip is obviously through. There's a number of reasons why, and we're going to continue to go through them as we go into the video. But that first bit of loss of confidence, you cannot fathom how a person will feel, and we're human beings at the end of the day. Where because I missed a penalty or I'm not performing at my best, people are going to abuse me because of that. Like, how can you like, there was some slander names and whatnot that were funny. I laughed, but it's sometimes you're going too far. You can't trash a man's family name. That's a name that's going to carry on through generations, and you're using it to play around and do banter when and it's just unnecessary. Because like, if you were to do that to me, if I see you in the street, it's a problem. You know what I'm saying? So, when that kind of things was happening, I couldn't believe it. And there's people with big accounts, big content creators that were doing this type of stuff, right? And then now they're singing his praises, and it's hypocrisy at the end of the day. So whatever you said back then, keep that same energy right now. Don't change your mind now because he's performing well on the pitch. You didn't believe in the player back when you didn't believe in the player when he was going through his dip, and not using your mind to understand and have a sympathetic view to say, oh, you know what? Because of all of these things surrounding him, he's struggling right now. But what I've seen previously, he can get back to that, and hopefully he can kick on and do more. But it is what it is. We'll leave that over there, rant over. Now, injury definitely was playing a part in the reason why his form kind of dipped. Now, we all know what was happening under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. He even came out and said it, where he was taking painkilling injections so that he could play through the pain. Like, so I think the game that the injury really first happened, I believe it was a League Cup tie against Wolves. We won the game 1-0. We weren't expecting Rashford to play, so he started on the bench and had to come on because it's either a League Cup game or it's an FA Cup replay. It's one of the two, where we weren't expecting Rashford to come onto the pitch, but United needed to win, so Ollie throws him on, and in that situation, anything could happen, and then he gets injured. And from that point, he didn't look the same. And he reveals it himself that he was in constant pain and having to play through the pain and having to take painkilling injections. For somebody so young, being forced to do that, like, it's crazy. And it's like, it kind of leans a bit into, I'm trying to remember, like with Paul Pogba, having one opinion from a doctor at United and then having to go get a secondary opinion because he doesn't trust the medical staff within the club. And it's kind of a similar situation here, where Rashford has maybe blindly followed the instructions from the medical staff as he feels that they have his best interests at heart. And, he goes on and takes these painkilling injections, and it's just not helping him. For somebody so young, that, if he was to continue to do that without, actually getting the root cause of the problem actually fixed, it's a problem. Like, for him further along down his career, and it's happened throughout football. You know, you've seen certain players who have had to play through the pain barrier, have had to take painkilling injections and all sorts of things to be able to even just do their job. And ultimately, you know, it ruined their careers. And you know, that's part of that. You know, I mean, Ollie was very keen on trying to get him onto the pitch because he knew he was one of his better players in his tenure. And without Rashford, something, you know, it doesn't work. It doesn't click up front for him and stuff. So, you know, there was that. And obviously the you know, the fact that he, you know, delayed his operation that he needed, that was so crucial to him and his recovery, then going to the Euros, not even getting really any game time, and you know, just delaying that operation where he could have probably taken the operation as soon as the season ended and used the summer to recover, get back into preseason training and try and get back to his best. You know, but on that, I mean, you can also blame Rashford himself. You can blame him and his team because, you know, they should be looking at his situation and saying, you know what, for the sake of his playing career, you've got to give him you got to get him into surgery and give him enough time to recover so he can get back to being his best. Now, when I talk about his team, you know, there was a time, you know, where there was a large emphasis in terms of the off the field accolades and the off the field work he was doing. And when I talk about that, I'm speaking about the free school meals campaign. I'm speaking about him writing a book. I think he's got 2 books out now, but you know, at the time there was only 1 book. You know, him becoming an MBE, you know, for his services to, you know, young people and whatnot, and in terms of this free school meals campaign. The constant PR messages, you know, like that will be coming from his account, the apologies after bad performances, but they're not following up with a better performance in the next game and whatnot. Like we can place blame at him and his team for you know, not creating a bit of a siege mentality. You know, things are bad right now. Let's try and get to the root cause of the problem, fix it, and then get him back fit and firing. That was really what was happening. But the kind of elevation as a player, his stature in the game, meant that he had another side to have obligations for in terms of off the field. And you know, I think for us as football fans, it's fine if you're doing that and you're also performing well on the pitch. Maybe there's been a better striking in the balance now. Rashford is now backfiring on the pitch, and there's a bit less of this PR kind of stuff and, you know, some of this off the field stuff, you know, because that stuff is great when you're winning and you've won everything in your career. But when you're still in a stage of your career where there's still more levels for you to go and there's so much more football to play and so much more to win, you know, it's probably not the best time to be doing that. But, you know, I feel like maybe lessons have been learned, and, you know, they're kind of tying that together now and making sure that the football is the main priority for him. And I mean, like, to kind of end it off, like, in terms of his last 18 months, that backstory that I'm speaking about here, like, you know, it looked like he'd given up on himself. Like, he looked drained, looked a bit like he was unable to handle the pressure. Now, as a young player coming into the game the way he did as a 17-year-old, you know, you're getting thrown in at the deep end. He was bound to hit a wall because as a young player with that kind of pressure that he has on his shoulders, like, he's basically, you know, thrown into the deep end, as I mentioned before. But then as basically a main key part of the team at such a young age, he was bound to hit a wall at some point. Like, I mean, when we were in the moment, we would just for some of us, we were wanting him to do well. But when you take a step back and you look at it in real detail, so much pressure on this young man's shoulders. Obviously, he was going to hit a wall at some point, because all young players do. They have peaks and troughs, like, throughout their careers, especially in those early crucial development stages. Like, and that's what happened with him. But, you know, we'll put that to the side, the backstory. Now, let's have a look at some things in a bit more detail. So you look at his temperament, and this is the thing that annoys me about, like, people. Like, the fact that you can question his ability as a player when he's contributed in a lot of crucial moments throughout the last 8 years of his career at Manchester United. Like, the debut against Midtjylland, scores 2. Scores 2 on his Premier League debut against Arsenal. Scored on his England debut, both England first team and under-21 debut. Scores in his League Cup debut, in his Europa League debut, in his Champions League debut. Look at the big goal record against the big 6 in the Premier League. Scored and assisted in every single one of those games. And then you look at even this season, the big games record. Like, he scored and assisted in all those big games. Like, the temperament of the young man is something that people don't highlight a lot. That is, like, he's a big game player. He always turns up in those big games. He's ready for everything that is going to be thrown at him in those big games. He will do his best to try and make sure he has some sort of impact in those games. And as I said, it annoys me that people have questioned that mentality, because he has a big mentality. And that comes from, he's come under a certain regime. Like, when he was a kid, Fergie was there. You walk into Carrington, you can see across from yourself on another pitch a Roy Keane. You can see a Rio Ferdinand. You know what I'm saying? You can see these players. Like, you see a legendary manager in Sir Alex Ferguson. He tried to make it a family kind of unit. So, those older players knew these young kids when they were playing for the club. So he came up underneath that regime. Just because he made his debut under a certain manager, he came up under that regime. So he learned how to be a Manchester United player, how to take on the responsibility of being a Manchester United player, being fearless, taking risks when he's on the pitch. Like, that came under that Fergie regime, and he was part of that. He grew up on that. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Before obviously as time moved on, and he was moving through the years and the age groups, he was still there with, that same mentality, because that same culture was just running through from the top right through the bottom in terms of the footballing side. But let's speak about his development now as a player. So, there are crucial development years between 18 and 22 years old. Like, at that point in your career, you're trying to establish yourself as a first team player, and you're trying to get constant elevation every single year. You try and establish yourself in the first team. Now, as I said before, he was thrown into the deep end at 17 years old. Nobody at the club was expecting him to make his debut at that point in time in his career, because we obviously had the injuries to Martial at that time, and I forget who was the other striker that was there at the time that would have taken his place anyway. But Rashford gets thrown into that situation. And even I feel like when you look at who was maybe ahead of him in the pecking order in terms of who was the next guy to go and to make his debut, they weren't looking at Marcus Rashford to come in, but he had to take the place, and he did. And then obviously the rest is history. Now consider this: in his 8 seasons, he's had 5 managers, 4 of them full time. Now, I don't care what you say, no player will be able to develop properly with a lack of stability and constant changes in terms of management. Because in terms of every manager that would have come in, they would have had different styles, different ideas, different formations, favorite players. So on the backdrop of all of that, as a player, a young player at that, how are you supposed to adapt? Like, how you don't have no consistency anywhere. So how are you supposed to adapt and actually, make those kind of climbs that you're expecting within those crucial development years that I mentioned before? Like, it's near enough impossible. And then this is a guy that, despite all of that was going on, for the first part, before his dip in the last 18 months, 2 years, he was scoring goals. He was assisting. Like, he was at least putting his best foot forward and playing the best football he could play. Like, at a certain point in time, there were question marks into, like, what's his best position? Is he a left winger? Is he a striker? Is he a second striker? Maybe not an out and out number 10, but somebody that can support the number 9. Is he a right winger? And I feel like those question marks obviously have been taken away, because now we've got a manager who, comes from the school of Ajax, or has been within that system within Ajax, and I'm sure he's studied it as well, because we've seen videos of him as a kid talking about that, Johan Cruyff and total football. And so now it doesn't really matter what position he is in terms of that forward line on the pitch. Wherever he goes, he's being taught to try and adapt to that position and try and, what is his actions on the field and when he gets into certain situations. And so this is why we're seeing a lot of players that will be on the pitch and they're making so many different rotations. And that's what we need, especially in a fluid attack. Now, there was those question marks would have been there, and we were, it was about, sometimes we kind of get caught in that mindset of he needs to nail down a certain position. But if he's able to adapt into any position in that forward line and be fluid and still be able to affect a game within those forward positions, then that is where he needs to be. Then that's the kind of mentality or the type of ability that he should be able to develop. And I feel like with what Ten Hag is doing with the club, and it's happening across a number of different players, it's only going to show up better when time moves on. Now, you know, his reputation and stock was rising as a result of the goals he was scoring and the assists that he was giving to other teammates, right? And what that did was basically put him in a position, gave him a greater position of responsibility within the team. And I feel like this is one thing that I feel it's not his fault, because it the fact that this happened, so obviously we've seen him make his debut. When he makes his debut, a couple of seasons pass by. It's a small thing, but the changing in numbers, he went from 39 to 19, then the 10. That's a big responsibility, because you've had some big players that have worn that number 10 at United. And that kind of, because he was delivering, that change in stature in the team, kind of made him become the main man. And I feel that also played a part in him as well, because he was like, I have to contribute in this game, or I have to do something big. And maybe sometimes you don't have to. Maybe you just play a good game and focus on playing a good game. You don't have to score or assist. And that definitely would have harmed his development. And it's the fault of the club in a certain to a certain extent, because their poor recruitment over the last few years has left players like Rashford, young players, to basically take the mantle and be the main men in the side. Where back in the Fergie years, and that's the only time I can really give you in terms of a sample, because that was a prolonged period of time. Young talented players were able to emerge as were given time to emerge as first team players on the backdrop of having more established players in the team to be able to mentor them and guide them. We never had that, but we haven't had that. So Rashford has had to come in and basically be a main man from the beginning, because of what he was doing on the field. And in an environment where you've got more established players that can guide and mentor, it means less pressure on the players of these young, less pressure on the shoulders of these young emerging players. Like, so you look at Rooney and Ronaldo, for example, when they were coming into the Manchester United first team, Fergie would do what he was doing in terms of give them minutes here, give them minutes there, but then obviously their ability was beginning to outshine that kind of process. But they still were in a team with Roy Keane. They were in a team with Rio Ferdinand. They were in a team with Scholes, with Giggs. So there wasn't that kind of pressure for them to perform every single game, because the coaching staff, the manager knows, the players, the older players know that young players will have good games here and bad games there. They'll give the ball away in certain moments in the game, and they'll have to learn from that. They'll try a trick when they shouldn't try a trick, or they'll shoot when they shouldn't try and shoot, and pass the ball and recycle possession. And Rashford and a lot of young players in the side, it's not just him, they didn't have that. They are now moving into being those established players for the next generation that are going to be coming in, the likes of Garnacho, the likes of Mainu as well, who's made his Premier League debut just yesterday. Like, there's that side to it as well. And obviously that's not Rashford's fault. That's the club. The club haven't, done the right job in terms of recruiting players to be able to help mentor these younger players. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a very interesting situation when you consider his development. Now let's move on to how we landed here. How has Rashford been able to turn around his form? Now, look, this season Rashford has played 36 games, scored 24 and assisted 8 in all competitions. Obviously, before the season started, it was rumored that he was doing a lot of work off the pitch in order to be ready for preseason and his first season under Ten Hag. And, that meant him working in the gym, doing some agility work, doing some speed work, just to kind of get himself in terms of overall fitness in the right place, so that he can hit the ground running as soon as Ten Hag comes in, so he can make the best impression on the manager he can as possible. And I'll say this, for the first time in his career, and let's be real, he has a manager who knows exactly what he wants from every single player on the pitch. So there's no confusion. You know that if you're going to be a part of this first team, this is what you have to do, and this is your role in the team. And I think that's the first time he's ever had that. He's been in such a cycle of uncertainty for so long. There's a commitment from the club to put this manager in place to be able to create a process that's going to give us the platform for success. and Rashford is a part of that, and knows what he needs to do, and it's very clear to him, so he can get to the point where he needs to get to in this team. You know, the manager is utilizing his key strengths, his pace, his ability to make runs in behind the defense, his explosiveness, his him being instinctive in the box, like the ability to shoot from long range, his strength. Like, those are key elements to his game that the manager knows, has studied, has analyzed, and is putting him in situations on the pitch so he can actually showcase these things. Now, this is the last thing I'll say on Rashford and how he's got to this point, and how he's turned his form around. Now, I'll give you an example. It might sound wild, but I'll give you an example. So remember when Cristiano Ronaldo came into the club in 03, a tricky winger, you know, with a lot of pace. And the club, the coaching staff made, and even him to a certain extent, made the decision to give him the transition from being that tricky winger into a ultimate goal machine. And that happened from 03 to 06. In the 06-07 season, we saw Ronaldo focused on scoring goals, and he hasn't looked back since. This looks like this is the stage that Rashford is in, where they finally decided, okay, we're gonna work on you scoring goals, and that should be your main focus. If you get some assists here and there, cool, but goals are your main thing. Putting him right in between those goalposts, like as soon as he gets the ball, drive into that position so that you can get in between those goalposts, so that you know the target. You got to shout out Benny McCarthy for that work, because that's probably why we're seeing him scoring goals at the rate he's scoring. This is the form of his life, as I mentioned before. Benny McCarthy, and for those that don't know, prolific goal scorer in Europe, especially when he was a part of that Porto team for a few years. You know, he's come in, he's part of the coaching staff, he's working with the forwards, and some of the work that they've probably been doing behind the scenes is what we're seeing coming into fruition right now on the field for Marcus Rashford. And it's like, I feel like that's the stage he's at right now. Just focus on the goals. Use all of your key strengths that I just mentioned before to get you those goals. And this is what we're seeing right now. And, you know, for the people that are going to be criticizing his overall game, that's not the focus anymore. The focus is on scoring the goals, because if he's contributing to goals at the rate he is, the team is going to be successful at the end of the day, because we need that. We need somebody to be, you know, carrying us in terms of goals, because we've lacked that a lot in the last 8 years, 10 years. No real out and out goal scorers that's scoring 20, 30 goals, 35 goals, 40 goals in a season to carry the team to some sort of success. And of course, I have mentioned before that, yeah, that main striker may be coming in, but maybe, you know, the club may go in a different direction and try and keep it fluid, you know, and have another player that can also score a good amount of goals, but then keep it fluid so that it doesn't upset the balance. But, you know, that's another thing for another day and all of that. But look, people, it's a bit of a longer breakdown, but look, I just wanted to kind of speak on the work that Marcus Rashford has done. And obviously, like, you know, I've been one that's backed him from the beginning. I've criticized, like everybody has. You know, we were frustrated when he was running into those blind alleys, but it looks as if he's changed his game a little bit and he's focused on the goals right now. It's not about trying to beat a man. And look, it's becoming very successful for him on the pitch, and I hope it continues for the rest of the season at least. But yeah, it was just what I wanted to do in terms of breaking down Rashford's development here and all of that. But look, it's your opportunity now to let me know in the comments what you think about Marcus Rashford, from, you know, the backstory that I mentioned up until now, this point. And, you know, let me know in the comments what you think about Rashford this season, and, you know, what is his expectations for the rest of the season as well. Boy, there's a lot to speak about. There's a lot to analyze. Make sure you're taking this video, boy. But look, I'll be back with some more content on United State of Mind and more content on Pros Only Sports. So make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you're new, hit that notification bell, hit those socials down below as well. And we are out, people. Peace.